Hi, welcome back to my channel. So, I've seen a few videos of these tier rankings floating around of people who have gotten English degrees and the classic books that they read for their English degree and what they thought were good books, and it's essentially a tier list, and I wanted to do the same. So, and this was like the first idea for a video I had for this channel. So, here it is. And here are my tiers. So, top one, S tier, would be I've read this several times outside of school, meaning that it wasn't just a good book, it was something that I've read so many times. It really connected with me, and I would highly recommend you read it. It's not just one you have to read for school, it's one that you will really enjoy. My A rank is It Moved Me in Unexpected Ways. This one is just, I haven't read it multiple times like the previous ones. I liked it. I didn't love it. Essentially, it was a good book and I enjoyed reading it, but it wasn't one that made me want to keep picking it up and reading it. It's a classic for a reason is my standard. Essentially, it was okay. It wasn't. It might not be culturally relevant to today's time, but it is. It does still resonate with some things. Um, and then my I think it's is that my C tier, I guess, is either it's overhyped or it's beneath or doesn't meet expectations. Essentially, if it's a book that like I don't know how to explain it. Essentially, the book is just okay. I could do without it when I was getting my degree. Might be some books that's going to be the controversial area. That might be some books that you're going to go, "Oh, how dare you say that about my book?" Well, it's my opinion, and you're allowed to have opinions when it comes to art. You're allowed to have your own perspective. And I would love to hear yours in the comments. So if you disagree with me, go ahead and comment. I welcome it. And the last one, my D tier, this is the fails. Uh, I had to spark notes it to pass the class, meaning I really DNF'd it, but because it was mandatory for school, I spark notes it to make sure I was doing good on my tests. That's essentially what that is. And I have picked books that I had to read. A few of them I had to read in middle school. Most of them I had to read in high school and college. Some of them were in high school. Some of them were in college. And the ones that were in college, I picked ones that were both for my English degree and both for my writing degree. I got both. I got a BA, as my favorite English professor said when I was going through college. I got a BA and BS. So if you don't know what that means, you can just puzzle that together. Anyway, so this is just a whole bunch of books from my schooling. There are some that maybe you didn't read and some that maybe you did, especially like some of the ones I had to read for high school because I went to a private all-girls boarding school. So I don't think a lot of those would be on your list because some of them are a little bit more feminine bent, and if you're a guy, you probably weren't reading it. Let's go ahead and get started. All right. So the first one, what is this? The Hatchet, I think. It's not letting me see. No. It's not letting me see the full thing. I think it's The Hatchet by Gary Paulson. To be fair, uh I think I'm going to have it as it's a classic for a reason. This was one I had to read in middle school. And so Gary Paulson did actually speak at my school, which was like really cool. So I got a signed copy. But yes, we did have to read this for class. And it's about, if I remember correctly, it's about a kid having to survive in Alaska. And while that adventure part is really cool, it's okay. Um, this is The Lost World by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I would say it moved me in unexpected ways. It was good. I enjoyed reading it. I did laugh at it occasionally, but was it one that I went back to many times over? No. Um, so that one was a good book. A Great and Terrible Beauty by Leva Bray. This one I have read several times outside of school. I really enjoyed it. And again, this was one from my high school days. And it was recommended because we were asked to read it because it's about going to an all-girls boarding school, and I was going to an all-girls boarding school at the time. And this was actually a really great book to read for that. Room. I can't remember who this is by. This one we had to read for my writing degree. And this one was turned into a movie shortly after. I think the reason we had to read it was because our writing professor actually knew the author. And I know for my husband's class, because he also got a writing degree, um, they actually talked with the author. They were able to schedule a meet and greet with the author. And this was later, like it was turned into a movie a couple years after. Don't be fooled by the kitty font and all that. This is a scary piece. I will say it moved me in unexpected ways. Uh, it's about a girl who is locked in a room. Uh, Essentially, she's been kidnapped and she has had her kidnapper's baby, and it's told from the perspective of that child, and what that girl went through and how they escaped. It's a dark book, and yeah, it definitely moved me. Scarlet Letter. Here's the thing: while the story is great, the prose are not. So yes, I had to spark notes it to pass. Here's the thing about that era of writing. So if you didn't know, publishers at that time paid more based on the word count versus today's, which is more based on how much you're able to market it. Um, so the Scarlet Letter did fall into that era of the ultra flowery prose that you're kind of just hoping would move on instead of actually getting down to what the story is. If you strip away the flowery prose and all that, the story is really good, and it's a compelling story. Scarlet Letter was definitely a one you does better in a modern telling. So like Easy A was a great version of it. It was a lot more connective to today. It and again, it's the flowery prose. It's the fact that publishers were paying based on word count versus um, reachability at the time. Okay, Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. I have read this so many times. It is such a good book. If you haven't read it, you need to read it. It's like it's about essentially book banning, book burning, and censorship, and in a dystopian society. And it was kind of crazy how much Ray Bradbury, I believe he wrote this in the 50s. It's crazy how much he predicted in the 1950s of how our society was going to evolve. It's a really, really great book, and I've read it so many times. Okay, here's one of those controversial picks: The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. It's overhyped. So many, and again, you can at me in the comments if you disagree, but I would have put it. It's a classic for a reason. If it wasn't for the fact that every single time I was like, it was okay, somebody didn't come at me and go, how dare you? So for that reason, it's overhyped. It's just about to me, the three main characters, Gatsby, Daisy, and crap, the narrator, I can't even remember his first name. Uh, they're all kind of not great people in 1920s. And yeah, I'm not a huge fan of F. Scott Fitzgerald's writing, and I had way too many professors who were just diehard fans, and it's just overhyped to me, so I'm not a fan. Heart of Darkness. Here's the thing. I owe a lot of my current life to Heart of Darkness. I wrote my dissertation on Heart of Darkness. Did I love the book? Absolutely not. I actually despised the book. But I wrote my dissertation on it. I got my second date with my husband because of it, because of that dissertation. Ooh, I don't know where to put it because it is a classic. But it's also, I did have to spark notes it to pass because it is a difficult read. I'm gonna have to say I had to spark notes it to pass, and I am sorry, but there are interesting parts to it, which is why I would have put it as it's a classic for a reason. You know what? Actually, I'm gonna move it. I'm gonna move it to it's overhyped because it's okay. It has parts that are really, really good and parts that are really, really bad. And yeah, I do owe a lot of my current life to it. I'll just leave it there. The Picture of Dorian Gray. This definitely a classic for a reason. Again, it falls into that era of flowery prose because of how the publishing industry went. I haven't read it multiple times, but I do love iterations of it, and I do appreciate iterations of it. Uh, it's a fabulous book. If but it's not one that I would read multiple times because it is harder to connect with because of the prose. But that's there. All right. The Glass Castle. This one, I would say it moved me. This one's hard. It's about family neglect, and being raised, and it's based on a true story. It's an autobiographical story of Jeanette Walls, talking about how she grew up and how her family kind of handled struggling with finances and all that. It's definitely harder, and it's more recent. Yeah. So Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I mean, who doesn't love a great mystery novel? And this is kind of the original, other than Edgar Allan Poe's first, which Sherlock Holmes was based on. I haven't read that one yet, but it is on my TBR. Persuasion, uh, by Jane Austen. I think it was this one that uh, we read. I actually read this recently, and it was really, really good. I had to reread it, and yeah, that one, I've read this several times, and it's really good. To Kill a Mockingbird. This one, it moved me in unexpected ways. I haven't read it past school, but just the stuff with Boo Radley and Atticus Finch and the perspective. This is what I would deem as classic 20th century American literature. That that right there. Yeah, that's Paradise Lost by John Milton. And that one, it's a classic for a reason, definitely. The imagery he has of the the war in heaven and the fall of Lucifer and all of that, it's definitely a classic for a reason. But again, this was written in like Middle Ages England, so or like early Renaissance, so it is harder to kind of read and understand, but it's definitely a classic for a reason. Charlotte's Web. This one, yeah, I would say moved me. Uh, Again, this one was from middle school, so it's uh, it's definitely a classic. It's oh wait, I put it in classic for a reason. Nope, this is up here. It definitely moved me. I remember crying a few times when I was reading a few of the later chapters. Just how the story unwinds. It's definitely a strong one. Um, a Wrinkle in Time. I would say it's a classic for a reason, just because it does kind of introduce its own sort of niche genre in kind of fantasy, um, especially in like kids fantasy. It's definitely its own thing, and yeah, definitely it's a classic. Little Women. Ooh, I think this one goes in its classic for a reason. Again, it's the floral prose. It's the same thing as Picture of Dorian Gray. The story is good, but the writing could use is not up to modern standards. So if you stripped away some of the floral prose, it would be a better book. Um, but yeah, it's definitely a good book. All right, another one that people are not going to be happy about. Wuthering Heights, definitely overhyped. It's not that good. It's not that good. Just my opinion. It's not that good. Oh, that one's not supposed to be there. I took out all the plays. Um, I took out all the plays, and that's Hamlet, which honestly, Hamlet's going to be up here. I can do the plays as a separate one, but it's not supposed to be there. So I'm just going to set that there. And I won't go into it because I'm doing the plays separately. Um, this one, what is that one? Again, because they're doing the square, I can't read what the titles are. Oh, The Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe. Definitely one of my favorites that I've had to read for school. To be honest, you're going to see one of my main biases, especially when it came to classic literature, is that I had a huge thing for the gothic horror stories and the romantic classics. Everything kind of in that era. I was a huge fan of those. I even, if I could have based my dissertation on it, I would have, but that class wasn't being offered when I was available to take my dissertation. Um, but yeah, definitely Mysteries of Adolfo. This one it's a classic for a reason. Again, this is one of the early Gothic books. Kind of solidified some of the Gothic tropes that were being that you see in Gothic literature during the Romantic era. The ghost, the castle, drama of it all. Essentially, she really figured it out better than the original. And this one was pretty good. It's a classic. Uh, Eli Wiesel's Night. Oh, this one is it definitely moved me in unexpected ways. It's a really good book, but I haven't been able to read it since, just because it's so hard. It's an autobiography of Eli Wiesel from when he went through the Holocaust, and it is a very very hard look at what happened. Uh, it's a hard look at his time in the concentration camps. It's a hard one to read, but I feel like very important to read. If you haven't read it, you should. It was a good book. Again, it moved me to tears, but it's a really good book. Um, I do believe this is Canterbury Tales. Next one. This one, it's definitely ooh, because it's so funny. It's so funny. I'm gonna put it here. It's for being in Old English, and we had to learn some Old English translate how to translate some Old English when we started reading it in college for some of the parts, and then there was a translation for some of the stories we read afterwards. It's such a good book. It's not finished. That's the thing. He planned to write like 120 stories to go in it into it, and he didn't finish. But the ones he did write are they're really funny. They're really good. The Sun Also Rises. Yeah. To be fair, I like Hemingway, but this was not my favorite. Um, I'm gonna put it there. It was everybody loves The Sun Also Rises, but it was only okay to me, and yeah, so overhyped. Life of Pi also overhyped. The beginning was interesting, uh, with the shipwreck and landing on the boat with the tiger and all that, and then the middle was just so boring. It was so boring that I ended up having to put it. You know what? Actually, yeah, no, Spark Notes. I did end up having to Spark Notes. I DNF'd it. A Separate Piece by John Knowles. This one was really good. I think I actually did I read it actually after school? I think I might have, so it might go up here. This is about a kid who's graduating from high school during, I believe, World War II, and he's about to get he's watching all of his classmates essentially get uh drafted into the war, and it's about struggling with that. It's really good. Animal Farm, yeah, I believe no, that's 1984. 1984. I there's a part of me that really wants to read this now. So I'm gonna put this here, but I've only read it once. Ooh. Mm, you know what? Since I'm planning on reading it again, going here. It's going there. All right, The Hobbit. I didn't have to read The Lord of the Rings, so I didn't put it on this list, but I did have to read The Hobbit. Uh, I'm gonna say it's a classic for a reason. There are parts of it that I absolutely love. That's great, but like you have to get past the first couple chapters. The first couple chapters are not amazing. They're not. They're kind of hard to get through. Um, so definitely, it's a classic for a reason, just because of how he how he brought fantasy as a genre kind of together. Like him and C.S. Lewis, both of them were big fantasy writers, and how they kind of brought back fantasy as a genre. It really is something. So definitely a classic for a reason. This is The Monkey's Paw. Definitely it moved me in unexpected ways just because it was terrifying. It was great. Um, Gulliver's Travels. I had to spark notes it. I had to spark notes it. It's the floral prose, and it's not amazing. It's I think I probably would have enjoyed it better because apparently it's a commentary on British politics. I'm not British, so kind of lost on me. All right, and this is The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. Mm, here's the thing. I've read them. I do enjoy the stories. I'm not a huge fan of how he writes. He writes essays really well, but I'm not a huge fan of how he writes fantasy. I don't I'm going to say it's a classic for a reason because again, the stories are really good, but I'm not a huge fan of that type of that more whimsical fantasy. Like it's a little too whimsical for me. Yeah, it is Henry James. Daisy Miller. It is about the American. Okay, so this one I did have to spark notes this. I probably would have enjoyed it if it wasn't for the floral prose. It's about essentially an American woman in European society, and it's essentially about how Americans culture clash in Europe, and you can still see that today. So, like, the story overall is good, but how it's written is not. Agatha Christie, The ABC Murders, that one was really good. I, I feel like I've read some of her stuff after school, but The ABC Murders, I think I only read 4 schools, so it moved me in unexpected ways. Dracula, I've read this so many times, so many times. I do love Dracula. It's the way it's written, it is terrifying. If you didn't know, it is kind of the original style of found footage because it's diary. It's written by with diary entries and letters, and it's like somebody had found all this evidence about Dracula existing and compiled it together into this story. It's really well done. Um, Flowers for Algernon. If you want to weep your eyes out, that's a story for you. Just that one is, whew. So that one definitely it moved me in unexpected ways. Holes. Holes is such a great book. It's such a great story. Definitely going up there. I've read it many, 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 many times. Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. Definitely up here. I've read it many times. Many, many, many times. Um, William Faulkner, As I Lay Dying. Mm, it's somewhere in between here. I'm gonna say there. I'm gonna say I had to spark notes it because I don't really remember it all that well. It did not leave a lasting impression. Okay, it's this is Willa Cather, and I think this is O Pioneers, and definitely I had to spark notes it. If you haven't read Willa Cather, don't. She wrote in Oklahoma or somewhere in the Midwest when it was being settled, and it should have stayed there. I'm not usually this mean about female authors, but Willa Cather is just it suffers from floral prose, and it suffers from just a boring story, and that is most of her stories. So I it definitely spark notes. The Wizard of Oz. I did have to read this for class. Definitely a classic for a reason. It was interesting to read, but it was also like didn't it didn't impress me past it being a classic. Ulysses. This is going to be one of the controversial ones. Uh, I this is the Ulysses by I think James Joyce. Um, the one where it's like based in Dublin and all that, and I did have to spark notes that just because it's a little heavy and it's not my cup of tea, kind of thing. Just it wasn't what I usually read. Okay, The Diary of Anne Frank again, classic for a reason. It does hit hard in areas for historical reasons. I don't have to go into that. Is it as strong as Eli Wiesel's Night? No, I would say this Eli Wiesel's Night is stronger, and that might just be because he survived, and also that book goes into the aftermath. I Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. Oh, this one is amazing. Now, don't watch the movie. Netflix did a movie a couple years ago, and it did not live up to it. Shirley Jackson, if you did not know, I found this out when I was doing research for this. She was the one who also wrote The Haunting of Hill House, and if you watch Mike Flanagan's first season show, The Haunting of Hill House, that's what it was based on. He did some different stuff with it. There's also a movie with Liam Neeson and Catherine Zeta-Jones from like the early 2000s that's closer to the Shirley Jackson book, but she wrote 20th century horror. She wrote in the 1950s, and We Have Always Lived in the Castle really lives up to that horror aspect, and you will not expect the plot twist. The book is written so well that like you will be blindsided. It's a really really good book, and I enjoyed reading it thoroughly. The Giver is another one that definitely goes here. I mean, who doesn't love The Giver? It's dystopian. I can't even put into words. It's such a good book. If you haven't read it, you need to read it. It's amazing. Telltale Heart. Oh my gosh. I mean, yes, Telltale Heart right up here. You're gonna find quickly that I'm a huge Edgar Allan Poe fan. I have read all of his stuff multiple times. So yeah, definitely good. The Odyssey was great. I remember really enjoying it when I had to read it. It was really really good. Um, Dante's Inferno. That's a classic. I haven't read it more than once. It's definitely a classic. Uh, it's essentially Dante fanboying about hell. It's a good book. But yeah, definitely a classic. Jane Eyre, I would also say is a classic for a reason. Definitely better than her sister's book. So both Jane Eyre was either Emily Bronte. I think that's Emily Bronte, and Wuthering Heights is Charlotte Bronte. I might have them flipped, but they're both written by the Bronte sisters, and Jane Eyre is definitely better than Wuthering Heights, 100%. Okay, this is another Willa Cather. This is My Antonia. I had to spark notes to pass the class. It was horrendous. Again, her writing should not have left 1800s Midwest. It shouldn't. Um, The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole. It's a classic. Oh God. Uh, if if you don't know what this is the original Gothic novel. Essentially, Horace Walpole had a nightmare based in a Gothic cathedral or castle that looked like a Gothic cathedral or something, and he decided to write down that nightmare and published it as a book. And to be honest, it is more funny than scary, but at the time it was terrifying. So, like in modern days, it's hilarious. I'm gonna say it moved me in unexpected ways. I'm gonna say that. And this list is getting thick. So Don Quixote is the next one. Definitely a classic for a reason. I had to read this for Spanish class, which we needed to take a foreign language and read in that foreign language for our English lit class. So there's that. The Turn of the Screw. Oh, moved me in unexpected ways. Definitely. This is another one of those horror novels that got turned into several movies. You might not know that. The Innocents is a telling of the Turn of the Screw, as well as Mike Flanagan's second uh, horror series, uh, The Haunting of Bly Manor. That's the Turn of the Screw. Great book. I've only read it the once because it's terrifying and I don't want to read it again. I am a scaredy cat, even though I love the gothic and the macabre. I'm a bit of a scaredy cat. Uh, Frankenstein, I would say, moved me in unexpected ways. Definitely, definitely iconic and definitely eye opening when it comes where it comes to the Frankenstein monster. Um, Chocolat, I've read this so many times. It's really good. And I did have to read this for high school, but it's a really good book. Kite Runner, I did end up having to DNF it. I would probably read it now, so I'm gonna say it's okay. But when I read it, I felt like it was too mature for when I had to read it for school. It covers some really dark and more mature stuff, um, and it was a huge bestseller at the time. So I'm putting it at either overhyped or beneath expectations. That could move because again, I'm an adult now. I'm more mature. I could probably read it without getting so uncomfortable that I had to set the book aside. Um, the Iliad, definitely a classic for a reason. It's about the Trojan War, and yeah, definitely. I'm not a huge fan about books based only on war, but it is definitely a classic. So it's there. No Country for Old Men. I had to read this for my writing degree, and it is bad. Do you like punctuation? Because Cormac McCarthy does not like punctuation. Okay, if you like punctuation when you read, don't read this book because you will not be able to read it. It's hard to read. Is this Jane Austen Prime? I think this is Pride and Prejudice, which definitely goes. I've read this several times. I love Pride and Prejudice. Jane Austen is great. Yeah, I enjoy Persuasion more. Jane Austen's still really good. Beowulf. Definitely it's a classic for a reason. It's a good story. Have I read it multiple times? No, because it's hard to read. Um, Especially that could be because again, when I was taking ancient English lit as a class, our teacher knew Old English and we had to learn Old English to read. And so some of this we were reading like original language and it's hard to read. Um, Moby Dick, I did have to spark notes it because again, it's a lot of whale stuff. I mean, there is like an underlying, oh, is the captain going crazy? Uh, which, yes, he was, but it's very boring to start out because again, it's also from that time of flowery prose. And whew, the yellow wallpaper. This is also like the Turn of the Screw, terrifying, but page turning. It's so good. Essentially, it's about a woman who goes crazy because the yellow wallpaper in her room while I think she's recovering, or like they say she's hysterical or something. I can't remember the details specifically. Essentially, she's been sequestered into this room and the wallpaper drives her insane. The Aeneid. I love Greek. You know what? It's overhyped. Or it was beneath expectations. I understand it as a classic because essentially it's the mythological story of how Rome started, but It's not like the Odyssey, and it's definitely not like the Iliad. It's, even though they're all like, all three of them are linked, it's kind of, it's duller than, yeah, it's not as fun. The Catcher in the Rye. Now, uh, here's the thing. Again, I was going to boarding school at the time when I had to read this, so I would put it as it's a classic for a reason, especially like for the later part of the story. But every single time I think about it, I remember how boring it was to start and how much we hated it. And I remember one of my roommates saying, if I wanted to read about a rich kid whining about drama in dorm room life, I would just read my diary. And for that reason, I'm going to put it in overhyped. Okay, Virginia Woolf, Mrs. Dalloway. I would say it's a classic for a reason. I think it's one of the first books that's like told purposely from multiple perspectives, and it's known for being for having an omniscient narrator that knows everything that's going on. Virginia Woolf is a good writer. The Bridge to Terabithia. Now, this will bring you to tears. Definitely, just heartbreaking. So yeah, Move Me in Unexpected Ways. Of Mice and Men, definitely up here. I've read it many times. It's really good. Uh, yeah, just it's good, and it's really short too. It's like 90 pages. Um, This Side of Paradise, right down here. Again, I'm not a fan of F. Scott Fitzgerald. If that's your thing, fine. I think he wrote This Side of Paradise based on his wife in Paris. Uh, but yeah, I'm not a fan. Not a fan. The Age of Innocence. If I remember correctly, it was just okay. It's Edith Wharton. It didn't leave a lasting impression, but I do still have the book, so I'm gonna put it there. And October Sky definitely moved me in unexpected ways. A good book, and that is all of them. If you don't, okay, little summary of October Sky. If you don't know, it's about the people who started the rockets in the NASA space program and where they started in West Virginia, coal mining in those coal mining towns where essentially the families were kind of owned by the company because of how the company handled money and payment, and how the brothers tried to get out of this town. It's about that. Um, so yeah, here's my tier list. I I know a lot of you probably don't agree, but this is my opinion. Um, and yeah, these are the best books up here. Amazing books, and I would definitely still recommend these books if you haven't read them. These are classics. You should probably read them. The rest of these, I would say read at your own risk. So I hope you all enjoyed that. Again, if you disagree with me, leave a comment. I'm sure it's probably not going to change my opinion too much. However, I'd still like to hear feedback. Uh, Hit a like, subscribe if you're not subscribed, and if you're interested for more bookish and writing content. And I'll see you all next time. Bye.